In the chaos of a complex global emergency, the majority of deaths are driven by invisible threats, diarrhea, and acute respiratory infections. These are communicable diseases, illnesses that spread from one person to another or from an animal to a person. Understanding how they work requires separating the organism from the action. A pathogen is the biological organism causing the illness. An infection occurs when that pathogen enters the body, multiplies, and damages your cells. This diagram outlines the 4 major physical routes these organisms take to reach our cells: airborne transmission, direct contact, contaminated water, and the bloodstream. Pathogens rely entirely on these specific modes of transmission to bridge the physical gap between their environment and our bodies. By categorizing these pathways, medical science can predict a pathogen's exact route and deploy physical barriers to block it. The most direct path into the body is through the air. Droplet infection occurs when pathogens ride on the moisture expelled every time an infected person coughs or sneezes. This medical illustration highlights the lungs, showing how floating bacteria and viruses target the respiratory system. Mycobacterium tuberculosis, the organism responsible for the most significant communicable disease globally, exploits this environment, incubating in the pulmonary system for weeks, months, or even years. Other airborne pathogens move much faster. The influenza virus can induce fever and chills in just 24 to 48 hours, while the measles virus typically erupts into a full-body rash within 8 to 14 days. Because these diseases travel on shared air, their spread accelerates in specific environments. Overcrowded populations and deep poverty ensure that infected droplets find a new host almost immediately. Airborne pathogens exploit our biological need to breathe. Stopping them requires manipulating environmental conditions and using isolation to clear the air. Some pathogens bypass our external defenses entirely. They require a vector, a biological middleman like an insect or an animal, to physically inject them into a human host. This diagram maps malaria's transmission cycle. The Plasmodium protozoa relies on an infected female Anopheles mosquito to act as its transport vehicle into our tissue. Once inside, it travels straight to the liver to multiply, before bursting out to destroy red blood cells. This same diagrammatic cycle drove historical outbreaks of the plague. The bacterium Yersinia pestis utilized a multi-stage vector chain, incubating in rats before fleas transferred the infection to humans. Vector-borne transmission presents a unique vulnerability. We can halt human infection entirely by targeting and eliminating the middleman, rather than fighting the microscopic pathogen directly. The final major front involves pathogens that wait on surfaces, linger on shared objects, or exploit direct physical trauma to get inside. Rabies is a zoonotic disease, typically introduced through a bite or a lick on broken skin. Once the virus enters, it slowly travels up the central nervous system, sometimes taking up to 90 days to reach the brain. Tetanus operates through different mechanics. The Clostridium tetani organism enters through acute injuries or burns, triggering severe muscle stiffness and intense spasms known as lockjaw. Even indirect contact poses a risk. Trachoma, a highly contagious eye infection, spreads through everyday items like shared towels or even by flies landing on the face. Surface pathogens transform our basic tactile interactions into biological hazards. A shared object, a minor cut, or an encounter with an animal can easily become an entry point. Pathogens are deadly, but they are entirely reliant on these physical pathways to survive. Blocking the airborne route requires active immunizations. Administering vaccines like the DPT or BCG prepares the body's defenses long before exposure occurs. To sever the vector pathway, interventions focus on the environment. Spraying larvicides to eliminate breeding grounds and sleeping under mosquito nets physically block the middlemen from making contact. Blocking surface infections requires immediate mechanical action. Strict sterilization of medical tools, and rapid post-exposure prophylaxis, like washing a bite wound with soap and water for 5 minutes, stops the pathogen before it can establish a foothold. A successful public health strategy understands the biology of transmission well enough to burn the pathogen's bridge before it can ever cross.